and shoulder pads, wasn't it? Did you love the hairdos, wasn't it?
I can't believe we had hair like that.
There was big hair, big shoulder pads.
Big expo. It was, we were right on the thing.
It was a massive expo. And Barbara, when I was getting ready to I was looking at what you achieved during that time, the stats are actually quite extraordinary, because I mentioned it was leisure in the age of technology, but literally in 1988, we all know if we were there that there really wasn't that much of it. I'd love to know how on earth you managed to coordinate 25,000 shows over 6 months, with many of them being international acts, to an audience of over 15 million without a smartphone, without an Excel spreadsheet, and no email.
No email. Well, you know, there were still letters. Pigeons, there were still phone calls that you could make. But you're right, just in looking back through some paperwork over the last few days, I thought, did I imagine that, or is that how we did it? But that's how we did it. And I found just some A4 sheets of paper, and we had made spreadsheets using rulers and pens, drawn up these pages with people's names and when they'd be performing and what they'd be paid and all the rest of the details there. And that's how we put our schedules together. We'd send them over to our contracts department, they'd draw up the contracts on the basis of that, and they'd make payments on the basis of that. So pretty much 25,000 performances were scheduled quite reasonably successfully on pieces of paper.
That's an understatement. Bob, I mentioned that for 5 years you were a part of the lead-up into Expo, and it's fair to say that in those years that was immediately before, when development started to happen, there was a fair amount of negative press. There was more than one occasion when everybody was expecting it to be a spectacular flop. At what point did you know that everything was going to be okay?
I think in terms of, well, I suppose you don't really know until the curtain goes up, if you like. But I can remember we were doing our ticket sales with the season pass, and we had a deadline. We were putting the price up every 3 months, and the first deadline approached. Ticket sales really started to take off, and you started to get confident that this is going to work. And it was the forerunner of Suncorp, SGO, Building Society in those days, and they were handling the ticketing for us. It was a sponsorship deal we'd done, and their computers crashed for 3 days at the end of that period. And I think then we thought, yeah, this is going to work. The volume was there. We were confident then that we were going to make it work.
But then obviously the gates had to open, and there had to be something to not only have people walk through them, but to keep them coming back, and they did.
Yeah, they did. And I think, obviously the entertainment was an important part about it. And I think, we had two people. There was Barbara working with Rick Birch and with the entertainment, and they put together a fabulous entertainment program. And I was saying to Barbara before, I don't think there's ever been a production team for entertainment like the team we had for them. And it ran for 6 months, which is, as Barbara said, was a challenge because it was so long. But I think it also meant that there was time to really work those acts, for the producers to be able to really get it right, because it wasn't going to be a one-night show, it was going to be there for 6 months, and that really worked. And the other one was, of course, we had John Truscott doing the theming for us and all the streetscape. And John was an Academy Award-winning, initially theatre set and then film set designer. And he really created a Hollywood set on the banks of the Brisbane River. And then we had the entertainers to perform in that set. And everyone could walk around in it. It was a Hollywood film set.
Sally, can you believe it's 30 years?
No. In fact, I was sitting there wondering, we're going to be back here in 40 years' time, because I think the most extraordinary thing about Expo, I mean, this has been Expo Week, this has been the festival of Expos, is how it's affected so many people over those years and is still affecting them. I think Expo had the most enormous emotional and even spiritual effect on people. Everybody who was around remembers Expo, and it's meant different things to different people. I was up in Kingaroy earlier this week because they've got an Expo museum which we launched in Kingaroy. Of course, Joe, home of, and all that sort of thing. But a chap said to me there, the man who was the general manager, Shane, of the South Burnett Times, was a little boy during Expo, and he reminded me, which I had actually forgotten, that we had initiated a program of home building, homestays, asking people in Brisbane if they would have people to stay. And his family did have people to stay, and he said it changed my whole life. He said, I've got friends from all over the world, and I met all these people from all over the world. And so I think it was that time of enormous happiness. People remember being happy. Thanks to you, Barbara, and thanks to you, Bob, for everything like you so well. But people remember being happy, and that's a memory they've carried with them. And it's a very important thing to hold in your heart.
I think it's fair to say that everybody was floored by the number of people who visited Expo, particularly those with season passes. And I'm not one to keep memorabilia, but I have my season pass. I found it, I'll show it to you later. I've got a beautiful Nick Kershaw flat top and very good short pads. But Barbara, when you knew that the people coming through the gate were going to mean that there would be lines that you could not have anticipated before Expo began, there were times when there were lines that queued for 4 or 5 hours to go into pavilions. You then became the walkways producer because you realised that there had to be something to keep everybody happy on a line.
Yes, well, I'd seen, I've got a saying that I've told many people over the years when they talk about Rick Birch disappearing so often and other people doing the work. And I say, well, you don't come up with great ideas, the big ideas sitting at your desk. So Expo, the entertainment program, developed and developed and developed right up until almost the last day. It kept developing. But in '86, I'd gone over to Vancouver. I'd seen some extraordinary performers who were unlike anything we'd ever seen in Australia. And I came back and I was the deputy director at that stage, and I said to Rick, we need this, we need walkways performers. And I tried to find a producer, a theatre producer in Australia who would put together this program of walkways performances. And of course it was such an unknown that the responses were always, but I'm a theatre producer. So I did take that one on because I thought it was so important. And just some of the people that we saw there before, talent such as we hadn't seen in Australia, but we wrote into the contracts, or there was an understanding with most of those international performers that they would train up Australian performers and help them hone their craft. And you saw Roger G on his roller skates there, roller skating mime. That sort of act was perfect for those cues because, of course, they could move along and they could entertain people, and they were great comic performers as well. I think that was a really important part of keeping people entertained in the queues and while they were waiting for the applicate, etc. And the pavilions were the core of Expo. The entertainment was always changing.
There's more than one occasion I know when people would be in a queue and they'd be getting to the front of the queue, but they'd be so enthralled in the show that would happen that they'd say to people, go ahead of me, I want to wait and see this finish and finish it off. Bob, for you, because you were so instrumental obviously in pulling this team of people together, it would not have worked as well as it did now in hindsight had you not entrusted all of these moving parts to people who clearly showed up for you and did exactly what needed to be done.
And I think one of the great things about Expo was that everybody in their own little way is determined to make that the best. That's the reason. Everybody's coming to Expo because of my little part in it. And that's what really made it so great. Everyone was really determined to make it the best.
And there are people here today, Laurie Smith over there, Leo Tsibikas, who was the Greek pavilion, Stefan, of course. So many people, Expo means so much to them, but they all contributed, even if they weren't sort of officially contributing.
Yep. Everybody was determined to make it great.
Sally, and as Lord Mayor at the time, we talk about how there was this shift in Brisbane's culture and psyche after World Expo finished. Can you give us a bit of a, from your point of view at City Hall, what was the part just after Expo like?
Well, I guess, and Graham will remember it, of course, because he was in City Hall. I'm not sure whether you were Chairman of Finance. He was Chairman of Finance, so it was all about the money. What we had realised early on was that what happened after Expo was going to be tremendously important. Expo was going to be a wonderful party, but that site is unique, was unique, is unique. Nowhere else in the world has that amount of land on the banks of a river, close to the city. And we thought about this before, because I'd been to Vancouver, and Vancouver was in a panic during the Expo, because they hadn't thought about it afterwards. So we, brought somebody back to talk about afterwards, and we had a clear idea of what we as a council wanted. But luckily, I reckon that was the first example of people power. The people of Brisbane, the people of Queensland, people who'd been to that site, virtually rose as one and said, no, that has to be kept, because Joe had promised that Expo wouldn't cost a cent. In fact, I've still got the newspaper cutting.
I'd never believe it.
Won't cost a cent. And he would have liked to have sold it off for commercial development, which would have been horrendous if you think about it, because not only is the site itself unique, but it's got art gallery, museum, theatres, now this, all at sort of one end of it. And luckily for me, I live at the other end of it.
So you must be reminded of Expo every day when you go for your walk.
I think isn't that wonderful? The South Bank Park, and of course, one of the arguments I used to have with Russ Hinds at the time, because we needed money from the government, was, well, why should I put all that money into the city of Brisbane? And I'd go, no, this is for the whole of Queensland. And it has been indeed, and when I walk down there now, there are people from all over the world enjoying the swimming pool. Some of the engineers in the council said couldn't be done. I remember one of the engineers saying, but it'll flood. I went, yeah, right, well that's water. It'll flood.
Water in, water out. I'll get Shane to talk a little bit more about that in the development, because it almost didn't happen as a people's park. It was right up until the end that it was going to be a casino and high rises and a concrete.
All sorts of things which we would not have liked.
No, not at all. You mentioned the fact that you live and play in that area now. As to many, well, you go and have dinner down at South Bank.
Walk about
It really did physically change the geography of this part of our city.
It changed the geography of this part, but it also gave people who lived in the outer suburbs, people who didn't have swimming pools in their backyards, it gave people a chance to come and eat outdoors. I mean, I think one of the great lifestyle changes at Expo was that whole idea of eating outdoors, which the state government had previously told us could not happen because dust and flies. We choke on the dust, be carried off by the flies, but Expo proved that it wasn't. And people of my parents' generation would have tea at 5 o'clock. And then, I don't know, go to bed or read a book or
Listen to the
wireless. But people actually discovered eating out is nice, and eating out at night's nice.
Not only did they discover eating out at night, Bob, but they discovered different cuisines. It was the first time that many people tried food from other countries. It really opened the doors for multiculturalism, didn't it?
Yep. Yeah, it really, it was a world show, and you had all the best entertainment from around the world, and you had some great cuisine from around the world too.
When it came time to dismantle Expo, it was really because the architects had done such a fantastic job of putting it together that we had a couple of things that remained, but most of it was really easy to then pull apart.
Yeah, again, that was one of the things that we were able to work on in terms of the pavilions themselves. We built a model pavilion, or in fact we built a mock-up pavilion, and then the engineers, architects that worked their butt off analysing every little bit of that to make sure it was going to work. And again, it's the advantage of having something on that scale. You can afford to put that effort into the upfront part to make it really work then for the longer term.
Did you get to enjoy some of it? I'd like to ask Barbara about the big rock shows. You know, there were some huge nights on that river stage, and I think many of us would have wished that the river stage was one thing that had remained. Did you get to enjoy some of those moments as well?
Well, to be honest with you, in the entertainment division, we enjoy being in the office as much as we enjoy being out at Expo. But we pretty much worked, from 9 a.m. till 10 p.m. every day. And then we'd scoot off for the big shows, probably get to watch half an hour of it and then hop back to the office. But there was such an extraordinary array of entertainment that was able to happen there. And people who say, oh, I wish we could have kept the river stage. Yes, except like every venue, you then have to continue putting stuff on in there. That being the problem. So it was never designed to ultimately, to stay in place because there was no budget to keep programming it. But David was just reminding me, David, our Piazza producer, is here, and he was reminding me that while a number of our staff partied more than we did, that a couple of days before Expo finished, David was right next door to me, and we'd be there saying goodbye at 10:15. But that we got quick access to pavilions about 2 days out, and he and I did a scurry around the site to see as much as we could that we'd missed before. But really, certainly in our division, there was nowhere that people wanted to be other than at work. So it was a terrific win-win.
Did you have any trouble getting those big names when it came to some of those concerts that we had?
Well, I think it was a bit unconventional for a lot of the thinking to perform on a venue like this, because of course they were performing in the big, the big venues around Australia. But Expo really got such a go on that it became easier to convince that artist management to bring them to Expo. But when you kick off with Little River Band and you've got a few others like John Farnham and Joe Cocker, one of my personal favourites, etc., already signed up, it was much easier to get other people to follow.
Bob, is there a highlight for you when you have these moments where you get to look back over the entire experience?
No, I think it was more than just that feeling for being able to walk around the site. I mean, whenever you felt like you were working flat out and things are getting tough, but if you walk down onto the site, it was just such a wonderful place to be. That's the takeout for me, is what a wonderful place it was to be. And I think, it was a 6-month party, but I think it was right that it finished, and that was it. The legacy really was the amalgamation of that site, and then what ended up afterwards being done with it.
And I think all of the firsts for people, we talk about how it changed our eating habits and the ability then to have alfresco dining, and now we couldn't possibly live without it. But even the idea that for many people, things like ice cream, it was the New Zealand pavilion that had gourmet ice cream, and up until that point, everybody's ice cream came in a packet with a stick. Like, those things were probably not at the time even realised, but then they became a part of our everyday existence, didn't they? We talk about some of the art, and we'll certainly speak more about that when we have the second panel. But it's lovely to have these lasting physical monuments that we have now around the city and around the state that remind those of us who are there or be able to tell the story of Expo.
And we should pay tribute to Peter Racy, over here, who's standing here. The Expo Art Trail has been one of Peter's babies for many years, and Peter has been to visit in my garage. And found all the things that I have, not the art in my garage, but lots of papers and memorabilia. So he's been dogged in his pursuit of keeping Expo alive, and I think we should pay tribute to him.
Yeah, absolutely.
With the art was that there was always a concern, because John Custer in particular had pulled some very valuable pieces of art from all around the world. And
he had very strong ideas.
Very strong ideas about it. And there was always that feeling, God, we've got all of this stuff here. What are people going to damage it? And there was really very little, if any, vandalism or damage at all. And I mean, there were $1 million pieces of art around that site. And it was just, when things were done so well, everyone was so happy, nothing was touched.
Sophie, I might just add,
Yes.
it was interesting for me. I've got some friends who live at Kangaroo Point, and they have a Christmas party every year. And I think I left about 11 last year, and a friend and I walked through Southbank, and we talk about it being the happiest place on earth during Expo. But I was absolutely amazed on a Saturday evening, 11 o'clock, walking along through Southbank, families, kids swimming, people, kids running around and people being happy. And I thought then, it's still the safe, happy place that it was in 1988.
It goes on.
It goes on.
Barbara, why do you think it's important though, like in these years when it's a 30-year anniversary, for us to really acknowledge that little spot in our history?
Oh, look, I'm a person who really, looks forward rather than looking backward. But of course, when you do look backward, you'd really love to be able to think of some ways in normal everyday life to create that sense that we had at Expo. Personally, I think it can be created in one scale or another in workplaces and other environments. But it's up to people to think that making people happy, making work fun, and giving them those sorts of experiences is as important as getting the work done, the productivity count.
We have such positive views of it in hindsight, but I have to say, you can draw a parallel to a recent big event where their closing ceremony may have not have gone as well as anticipated or hoped. So clearly doing this is not easy, and after 30 years there are still hits and misses. It doesn't feel though that when we look back at Expo and we share these stories that there were any big misses.
Because you had terrific people doing it. Terrific people doing this.
You know, do you think that was just that it happened to be at that time, or can we just go, this was an extraordinary group of people who just did a really amazing job?
Yes. I can say that because I wasn't doing it. So no, I think we did have, very luckily perhaps it was fortuitous that this great group of people came together. Not just this, but people like, you know, John Truscott, and we're going to hear more about you, Edwards, at all. Ned Williams, who doesn't get talked about much, Sir Edward Williams, was a great personality. He was a great presence for Expo. Everything, I don't think, and I don't know if anybody in this room can think of any mistakes made. I can't think of any mistakes that were made during Expo. I can't think of any glitches. Well, there were little tiny glitches.
Little tiny ones, but not
nothing.
It's not ones that people found out about.
And I think that's what I'm getting at. I think it's a testament to an extraordinary group of people who all had a common goal and vision and then were able to execute it, given the ability to be able to do that, because it's a major undertaking and one that we as a community and a city will be ever grateful for.
And people who actually understood Brisbane and Queensland, when you were talking about that other event, that might have been the problem with it. They didn't quite get the feeling of what we're on about here. And even though there were people from overseas, and John Truscott came from Melbourne, and lots of people from other places came and helped, but the core people understood Brisbane, understood Queensland, and knew what
Oh, this World Expo, and I can remember very vividly, was unapologetically Australian. From the way, you know, when you came in and you were greeted, yay!
it was authentic.
It was very authentic in our delivery. We weren't trying to be something else. And I think that when you talk about our city being on show for the first time and Expo not going to one of the southern states, nobody tried to make Brisbane something other than it was for World Expo, did they?
Absolutely, and I think, Brad, we've continued to do that. We are who we are, and we're proud of it. We're show the world.
Everybody's going to have that song now as an earworm in their head. We might play it again before the next panel, just so it's well and truly in there. I'll finish off, Bob, by asking you, before we let everybody continue on with their main meal, you know, we can't help, as I said, when it is an anniversary year, to look back at all of the people, and you mentioned a couple of them that were pivotal. But do you think that there is anybody who went through Expo who hasn't kept a little bit of it in their heart?
No, I think everybody, whether as part of the organising team or whether they were just a visitor for a day, everybody had that feeling. And I think for us that were involved in it, and like with Jane from day one, we went through, and maybe this was part of it, we went through a very tough time there for a long time. And so maybe that just made you that little bit more, God, we're going to prove these figures wrong. We will really make it happen.
Because I think that was very important. Everybody said it couldn't be done. People from the south said Brisbane, Expo, gosh, it would be chaos. Why would we want it? And then people came and went, wow, isn't this fantastic? So for us, there was that element of, we've showed you. And for other people, it was the element of surprise. And therefore, perhaps because their expectations were rather low, they enjoyed it even more.
And we're so glad that they did. Please put your hands together for us. We'll have main meal served now, and then we'll be back up.